Hey, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. Lieutenant Colonel Nick Barringer. Very special day today. We have a treat for you. We have the Army Medical Specialist Corps Chief, Colonel Promotable, Deydre Teyhen decided to stop by today, take time out of her busy schedule to share some of her knowledge with us today. Very excited. Colonel Teyhen, thank you so much for being here, ma'am.
I'm so glad to be here today.
All right. You know, one of the things I like to ask guests that come on, particularly ones wearing the uniform, ma'am, is what is your Army story? What kind of brought you into the Army, and then how you became a physical therapist?
You know, my Army story, the start of it is very unique. I grew up south of Kent State University in the 1970s. Wow. And so although the riots that occurred at Kent State happened, really people didn't talk about the military. So it wasn't an anti-military environment, even though we were just south of Kent State. It just wasn't a conversation that came up. And so I knew I wanted to go into medicine, and I knew I really wanted to go into physical therapy, but at the time it was pre-internet, so you had to send applications out to schools, and they would send you a packet in the mail, and you'd go through all the packet. And I got this program back for the Army-Baylor program, and I really just fell in love with the program, their mission, their vision. But again, not knowing much about the military, I said, you know what, I should go to a military installation and check it out. So I went down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and my cousin was a scout there. And I spent the day in the physical therapy clinic, and I just thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. I don't just want to be a physical therapist, but I want to be able to do it in a way to serve America's sons and daughters. And then I got to OBC at the time. I know it's called Bullock now, and it fit me like a glove. Like, here I am, someone direct commission, didn't know much about the military, and end up being like the honor grad of OBC. I didn't know there was such a thing, right? And so there was a group of us. I'm like, oh, who knew? But it just was an immediate fit because how my parents raised me, how I was raised, and then the values of the Army were just perfectly aligned. And so it was something I never grew up thinking about. And I like to tell this story for those that are thinking about joining the military, and they are folks that were recruiting and they're in a similar situation and they don't know. I think it's very helpful for them to hear that, yeah, I didn't know either, right? And who knew that I'd be sitting here almost 30 years later, right?
Wow. Yes, ma'am. And then you did your doctorate at University of Texas? Is that right?
Yeah, so I did my Ph.D. at the University of Texas in Austin, and then I did my DPT at Baylor. And both of those are amazing programs, and I think that's one of the real I think those that don't know Army medicine really don't understand how much Army medicine invests in its people, right? Every year people have the opportunity to apply for long-term health education and training. In doing so, we send them back to school. And so I firmly believe the folks that provide care to the Army are the best educated and trained force in the country, because there's no other organization that sends people back to residencies, fellowships, PhDs, as a way to not only invest in them, but to retain them on active duty so they can continue to serve.
I couldn't agree more with you, ma'am. I am a benefit of the long-term health education and training. And I always remembered your advice when I was going in to do the research to change the world was, kind of no focus on the research that'll, get you through the program and then, go out and change the Army. And so I've really appreciated that advice, and it served me well, and couldn't agree more in terms of the opportunities that the Army provides. Now, this is the Fuel the Fight podcast. We talk about nutrition. We talk about fitness. You are a fitness, I don't want to say fanatic, but, in a positive way, because particularly, with marathons and swimming, can you talk about those fitness passions and how they kind of shaped your career?
Yeah, so I married a runner. And when we first got married, the Army moved us to the D.C. area, and the commute was long, the days were long, and then he would want to go run. And I'm like, well, if I want to see my new husband, I better start running too, right? And so we started running. And we were doing small races, and then we started doing marathons, and we decided we would do a marathon in all 50 states. And really, it was more than the fitness goal of doing a marathon in all 50 states. It was about taking 3 to 4 day weekends and investing in each other. Because as dual military, sometimes it's hard to line up our schedules where we can take long vacations. But you can always take a 3 to 4 day weekend, especially over a holiday, and just invest back into yourselves a little bit. And so selfishly, doing the 50 state marathons to me was more about investing in our marriage along the way, in addition to the fitness goal. And then when the Army stationed us in Hawaii, I started doing triathlons. And I haven't done a full Ironman. I've only done a half Ironman, but that's where my love for open water swimming was discovered. And there's nothing like going out, and I call it my blue therapy, is to spend 2 to 3 hours swimming in the ocean. It's just, it's very, not just good for fitness, but good for mental health.
Oh, nice. And I had known that. Yeah, I think you guys were the first military couple to run the 50 and 50. And I think it's important to also note your husband's a retired colonel as well, so that talk about like two really busy schedules, trying to make that work, and then kind of the secret being that marathon and that fitness training to do that together. Any particular thing challenging on those marathons that you learned, maybe particularly, I think it was Whidbey Island. Was that the toughest marathon you ever
Whidbey Island
ran?
So each marathon is a mental race as much as it is a physical race. And I think the benefit of doing endurance sports is the grit it gives you and the tenacity. So the Whidbey Island Marathon is one where we thought halfway through maybe we should just have gone for a cheesecake in all 50 states instead of a marathon in all 50 states. The weather was so bad. It was raining sideways. It was so cold. There was a point where I just went into the porta potty, not because I had to use the bathroom. I just needed to get out of the wind. And it was just, the weather was just miserable. But you realize you can persevere. You realize that you can get through it, and you can do quite fine. One of the other marathons, we had rain, thunder, snow, sleet, and it was called Run with the Horses, so it was all in trail run, but it ended up being so muddy that you had to stop every couple yards and get the mud off your shoes on a rock, and then you could continue running again. And so to me, it's more than just the physical benefits of fitness. It's the mental benefits that come from persevering and developing that grit and that determination that you can do more than you think.
Yes, ma'am, and hopefully the young soldiers listening to that. So when you're, thinking about that, 12-mile road march, and you think it's impossible. Imagine having to take every few steps and wipe the mud off your shoes for 26.2 miles. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. One of the many cool things you've done in your career is you kind of helped stand up the performance triad, which was before holistic health and fitness. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how that came about?
Lieutenant General Horoho had the vision of really changing Army medicine from a healthcare system to a system for health. And this key signature piece of that was her performance triad, the value of sleep, activity, and nutrition. And I had the honor to help make her vision a reality. And what she always said from the beginning is, we'll know we're successful when the Army thinks it's their own program and they're owning it. And that's exactly what happened, right? So her vision of the performance triad became the foundation of holistic health and fitness, where they added spiritual fitness and made it a little bit more well-rounded, right? From just the three that we were focused on. And really, it grew from there. But the reality is, it's about investing in soldiers who give so much to our nation. So if there's only 1% of Americans who both qualify and volunteer to serve our nation, we owe them the best that we have to offer, so that they're physically, cognitively, emotionally ready to defend our nation. And performance triad, while it is at its heart focused on improving sleep, activity, and nutrition, the why behind it is to make sure more American sons and daughters are able to come back to their families after we send them to war, right? Because if they have better physical fitness, they have better mental agility, grit, they have vigilance, they have determination. They will be able to withstand the battles that our nation asked them to do and what they volunteered to do better. And so the why behind Performance Triad and H2F, although it's at the individual level about their fitness, the importance is really at a national security level and bringing them home to their families.
Yes, ma'am. No, couldn't agree more there. How is that, you talked a little bit about that transition. How has that experience with Performance Triad helped you as the consultant now with H2F, since we're so heavily involved as far as the Army Medical Specialist Corps with the occupational therapists, physical therapists, dietitians now being down at the brigade level?
I think it helps dramatically how it's evolved. What our specialists have in the Specialist Corps is the subject matter expertise to help leaders make informed decisions on how to best invest in their soldiers. Now that this is a TRADOC run program, we're allowed the leaders to really make sure that they're clearly articulating their requirements, and then our teams as SMEs really can get in and make sure we get after that. I learned that lesson in Hawaii. So, we had all this great content for Performance Triad, and then I was pushed out to command the Schofield Barracks Health Clinic, which supports the 25th Infantry Division and 8th TSC. And we're out there, and I have all these tools that were going to make them, better. And what I found out is, 3rd Brigade was really into profile PT. They wanted to optimize, once a soldier was injured, how to get them back in the fight. So that's where we focused on. 2nd Brigade, they had a tragic accident, and so they were really worried about warfighter fatigue management. How do we optimize sleep? Sustainment Brigade was all about improving their DFAC. And what I found is that by working with the leader driving what they needed and then the SMEs being there to support, once they got a win, then we could go on to something else and we could grow the program from there. And so to me, although Army Medicine, General Horoho's vision really started this process, the fact that it's now part of TRADOC and our course in support, and with a lot of other aspects of Army Medicine supporting, to me, that is the ideal setting, because then once the leadership tells us what they need, we can show them all the different ways to get there. Because at the end of the day, it's about buy-in. It's about buy-in not just from the soldier, but buy-in from the leadership. And we need to make sure that the programs we give them are feasible, acceptable, and sustainable. And it's getting them to their goals. And so to me, the transition has been brilliant. And I think it's much easier for us to support their requirements in that way.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's great. It's highlighting there the buy-in and getting that. And kind of, I love the example of meeting the unit where they're at, where you have these 3 different units with maybe different mission sets, and so they have different focus. Maybe the support folks might have more body composition, so they need to focus on the nutrition, whereas like you said, a unit facing a tragedy needs to focus more on like the mental health and sleep. So again, a lot of great lessons. Hopefully H2F folks are listening to this and taking copious notes, because a lot of great lessons being offered here. Now, ma'am, you're in town for a very special event, the SP Corps 75th anniversary. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of this event?
Yeah, so our Corps gets to celebrate our 75th anniversary this week. And although we can trace our roots back to World War I, it was really 75 years ago that we were established as the Women's Medical Specialist Corps. And then it might be surprising to some that it took some years later till we were allowed men into our Corps. And so as we celebrate the 75th anniversary, what we're trying to do is take time to remember the past, celebrate the present, and really embrace the future. And it's a really interesting time, because what has happened really in our careers is that we were mostly in the hospitals, right? And over my time, and I'm almost at 29 years, right? We are now mostly out in the line units, meeting soldiers where they need to be met on a daily basis to get them to a better state of health through the 4 specialties that make up the Specialist Corps. And that's happened in our career. It started with the Rangers, it then went to the Special Forces, then it started just in infantry brigades, and now it's H2F. And that type of growth, when we talk about embracing the future, only comes because we can remember the past that got us there, and all the folks that have shown that when you optimize how allied health providers can be used at the top of their credentials, we can really build readiness. And it reminds us that illness and injury doesn't really just stop when you stop seeking medical care. It actually transitions. We owe those folks that volunteer to serve our nation, we owe that we transition them back to their optimal health, which is very different than what the U.S. healthcare system has to do, right? So in the U.S. healthcare system, you might only have 7 visits after an ACL. Well, we aren't limited. Our job is to get you back to be able to deploy and defend our nation, and it doesn't matter how many visits that takes. And so as we celebrate 75 years, we're really celebrating a transition in which allied health providers across Army medicine have been able to really work at the top of their credentials. And part of that has been also opening up leadership positions. It started about 4 surgeons generals ago that we were allowed to compete for really command at the lieutenant colonel and colonel level. And right now we had, probably about 15 years ago, we had our first SP officer get to what's called a senior nominative command, the second level 06 command. About 10 years later, I was the second, but now we have the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th all lined up. And so I think the real exciting part of that is that as we've shown our benefit out in the field and our leadership capability and what we bring to the fight, it's actually opening doors to leadership opportunities. And those opportunities, it's not really about the position, but it's about what the position provides and our ability to really help the installations that we serve on truly get after readiness and really understand that there's a lot more to medicine than pills, potions, and procedures, right? It's really about that fundamental behavior change that happens as people embrace health.
Yes, ma'am. No, a more holistic approach to medicine,
right.
if you will.
Yeah.
No, I'm so glad you talked about the leadership because it kind of sets up my next question in terms of, you've shattered every perceived barrier in your career in terms of what SP Corps officers can do. You're going to be the first active duty flag officer in the SP Corps, which is amazing. What advice can you give to other soldiers out there in terms of breaking through barriers?
Yeah, Tim Tebow was here just a couple weeks ago in San Antonio, and he was just meeting with the Wounded Warriors, and he talked about the fact that his first part of his life was about being successful, right? Winning football games, right? But his second part of his life, he wants to be of significance. That comment and how he displayed that was really powerful to me. And what I think back is, as a second lieutenant, none of these leadership opportunities existed. I think what makes the people in our Corps so special is that we aren't trying to be successful we were just trying to be of significance, right? So we can see what our professions can bring to the fight, and we inherently want to help others do that. So I don't think there was anything special except for the fact that I never wanted to be successful or breaking a glass ceiling. That never was a goal. My only goal was to be of significance to those we serve, and so I think by blooming where we're planted, the people that have come before have opened up doors that I've been the beneficiary of, right? All those other SPs that went to command first and showed that we can command allowed that to happen for me when it was never, as a second lieutenant, never a goal, right? I just wanted to help people get to the best shape possible so when they deployed, they could defend our nation and come home to their families. So to me, what I find as our culture in the SP Corps is that we have a lot of officers who really are all about being about significance and not about being about success. And although success can happen, it wasn't the goal, right? The goal was to really give back and to serve.
No, thank you, ma'am. And I highlighted that. And again, for those listening to this and maybe young officers taking note, is to focus on, no matter what job, whatever your role is, be significant in that role, not looking at maybe the next goal, just focusing on being present.
Yeah, bloom where you're planted.
Bloom where you're planted. So I really like that. Speaking of that, for the young SP officers out there in those, H2F units, what can they do to kind of set themselves up for success in those new environments?
I really think it's about getting to know the leadership of the unit, really understanding what they want to accomplish, and then helping them accomplish that. And then as you gain success, build upon that. And we teach this very well when we talk about dealing with patients. It's called motivational interviewing, right? We go to school, we learn about motivational interviewing, meet patients where they need to be met, help them on their journey to health. And we don't think about it in the same way when we work with unit leadership, but we should, right? There's no difference. So we want to use motivational interviewing to be able to understand what they think the unit needs to accomplish and then help them on that road. I think the challenge will be, because the Army's going to take until 2030 to roll out H2F to all the units, so the available resources will be growing until 2030, but you could be in a situation where you don't have all the resources that the Army is planning on putting there in the future, and yet you're there trying to make magic happen. And that magic happens when you really partner with the leaders and understand how to accomplish that goal. I saw this firsthand when I got to visit up at Fort Drum. Everyone was working together as an interdisciplinary H2F team. And if the focus was on the physical fitness piece, everyone was focused on giving feedback and helping the soldiers out on that. And then when they finished, they did a mental challenge, and the OT took the lead for the mental challenge, right? And then and everyone else was support. And then when they finished that, they talked about refueling for recovery. And then the dietitian took the lead, and everyone else was in support. So to me, it's about that interdisciplinary team making advancements to the unit's leaders' goals.
I love that example, and couldn't agree more. Know some folks up there at Fort Drum. Mark Taysom, one of the strength coaches, and see all the great things that him and his team are doing. It's amazing, and definitely no silos.
No silos.
Those environments. So that's awesome. What do you see for the future of the SP Corps?
I think it is really bright. Obviously, we've been growing as we meet the needs the Army has asked us to meet with H2F. And that growth is an exciting opportunity. I think the challenge is really understanding how to get after the metrics the Army wants us to do to show the benefit of H2F. And the challenge there is the cultural change. And so how do you create the cultural change to really embrace H2F across the Army to demonstrate those true metrics that we can measure? There's an old quote from one of the prior chiefs of staff of the Army that says roughly, the Army enlists soldiers but re-enlists families. And one of the real tests, if we get H2F right, because really it's about an investment in the soldiers who have decided to volunteer and serve our nation. If we get this right, we should have more people re-enlisting because we're putting people first, right? We're really putting people first by making sure they have the proper training and resources to be able to do what the nation's asked them to do. And if we do this right, we should see re-enlistment rates improve, right? And I know that's a long tail, that's not a leading metric, that's a lagging metric, but it's one that's really important. And I share that because if we think about it very tactically on H2F, we can make certain metrics go up, right? But we really want to get the really important metric to go up, which is really re-enlisting, because the soldiers that join our Army feel that they're valued and they see their why within our mission of the Army.
Yes, ma'am. No, and retaining that talent, right? That's always a challenge. So there we go, another kind of H2F metric too that could be out there in terms of tracking reenlistment rates in different units. Might be useful. Ma'am, where can folks find you? Are you on social media, or is there a page you recommend folks follow? Or?
Yeah, so we have the SP Corps on Facebook and Instagram. I think we're going to Twitter soon, but we're not there just yet. And then personally, I'm on Facebook and Twitter too. And so I can be found in any of those locations.
All right. And then do you have any book recommendations or any resource recommendations for folks?
I think there's a couple ones. For those out in H2F land, I would really read the book Upstream. Upstream is about how do you really get upstream of major problems. And you might think about it from a suicide prevention perspective, and it's April, so sexual assault and harassment prevention, right? Getting upstream of those. It also is about getting upstream of personally things in your life, right? Having a solid marriage and a solid family. It's also about getting upstream of injuries and health. But it's a really good book, and it shows the complexities and the challenges of doing what H2F is trying to do, which is to get upstream of so many of those issues when we don't fully invest in holistic health, right? And so to me, Upstream's a good book. For our clinicians that are listening, I really like Patients Come Second, which is a provocative title, but it's the idea that leaders try to ensure the needs of the people working in the hospital are met so that those people treating the patients then can focus on the patients, right? But the follow-on book to that is called Beyond Heroes. And what's the benefit of Beyond Heroes? It shows how do you operationalize a people-first approach as a leader in medicine. And so those would be the three books that I would suggest.
No, and I'll put those in the show notes. I like the Upstream, the idea of getting, you want to be left to the bang.
That's right.
For sure.
And that's really the concept of H2F, right?
Yeah.
Is getting left to the bang on all these challenges so that when we talk about readiness, it's not just that you have your PHA and dental exam done, but that you're truly ready, right? You're physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually ready for the mission you've volunteered to do.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you sitting down with us today and sharing all that knowledge. And hopefully our listeners, you're taking copious notes. If not, listen to this again because, I've got my page full here. Always learn so much listening to you and really appreciate it, ma'am. And thanks so much again for stopping by.
Nick, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate what you're doing to help all those out there focus on H2F, have a resource and an ability to do personal development along the way. Thank you for doing this.